another historical fiction author chat. Oh, I'm so happy to be back with you guys. I have not done this ever since, well, we're not even going to use the H word, but the people that took over this page and tried to scare me off, but I'm back. And I brought my friend Donna Jones Alward with me today. I know Donna from when I lived in Nova Scotia, and she is like one of the superstars of authordom in Nova Scotia. Hi, Donna.
Hi,
Nice to see you.
you too.
You know what, Donna was one of the first authors in Nova Scotia that I reached out to, probably the first. And I remember, Donna, when I went to Chapters one day and I sat down to do a signing, and poof, there you were. And you said something like, I remember how these things can get a little bit lonely. So I've come to keep you company. Do you remember? You came and sat with me. I was like, somebody knows I'm here. That's very exciting.
Yeah,
It was very kind of you. So
I gotta tell you, you had your books put together like a trilogy with like pretty ribbon on it. And I'm
yeah.
like, that is the best idea ever. So your table was so pretty. I remember that.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's all about packaging, right? Promotion.
That's right.
Well, we are here today to talk about Donna's new book. It's called When the World Fell Silent. Comes out today, August 6th. And this has been coming for a while. I read it months ago, and when it had a different name to it. And I'm excited for you guys to read this because it goes back to something that was really well, obviously it was a big passion thing for me, the Halifax explosion, something in Canadian history that we are not regularly taught about, but we should know about. It's a major point in Canadian history. And I don't know, I don't understand the curriculum when they're not teaching about these huge moments, but
Me either.
that's what we historical fiction authors are here to do for you and for us, because I didn't know any of it. So now I'm going to read you Donna's bio, and then the synopsis, and then she's going to treat us with a little sample from When the World Fell Silent. Since 2006, New York Times bestseller Donna Jones Alward has enchanted readers with stories of happy endings and homecomings that have won several awards and been translated into over a dozen languages. She's worked as an administrative assistant, teaching assistant in retail, and as a stay-at-home mom, but always knew her degree in English literature would pay off, as she is now happy to be a full-time writer. Her new historical fiction tales blend her love of history with characters who step beyond their biggest fears to claim the lives they desire. Donna currently lives in Nova Scotia, Canada with her husband and 2 cats. You can often find her near the water, either kayaking on the lake or walking the sandy beaches to refill her creative well. I do miss that about Nova Scotia. Hello, Nova Scotia, by the way. I haven't said hello in a while. All right, now, When the World Fell Silent is actually, there's something really special to it too, because, and we will talk about this later, but Donna has recently shifted gears a little bit to move into the historical fiction genre, which is the greatest thing ever. And her history is based on contemporary women's fiction, which her books are wonderful to read, but this is my passion. So that's why I'm hanging on to this one. So When the World Fell Silent, here's the synopsis: a story of loss, hope, and redemption against the most impossible odds. 1917, Halifax, Nova Scotia. Nora Crowell wants more than her sister's life as a wife and mother. As World War I rages across the Atlantic, she becomes a lieutenant in the Canadian Army Nursing Corps. But trouble is looming, and it won't be long before the truth comes to light. Having lost her beloved husband in the trenches, and with no one else to turn to, Charlotte Campbell now lives with his haughty relations, who treat her like the help. It is baby Aileen, the joy and light of her life, who spurs her to dream of a better life. When tragedy strikes in Halifax Harbour, nothing for these 2 women will ever be the same again. Their paths will cross in the most unexpected way, trailing both heartbreak and joy in its wake. Which we do know that about the explosion. All right,
Yeah.
now I'm going to disappear. And Donna, over to you.
All right. So I'm going to read a little bit today. I'm going to try to keep it not too long. This is a section right when the explosion happens. And for those of you who don't know, I'll just give a very, very brief sort of summary. But 2 ships collided in the harbor that morning. and one was carrying munitions. It caught on fire. Everyone was so excited about the spectacle in the harbor. People went to their windows to watch. They went down to the piers, and it was all very exciting. And then the ship exploded, and it leveled an entire section of the city, killing about 2,000, just under 2,000, wounding around 9. And it was a massive, massive casualty event. So what I'm going to read to you is it's from Nora's point of view. It's basically from when she arrives at the hospital that morning. She works at Campbell, which is really a convalescent hospital that was it was built to serve maybe like just under 300 patients, and it's going to get very, very busy. So that's where I'm going to start, and we'll just see how we get along. There was no time to waste when I arrived. I went straight to my duties, attending to the wounded. Some of my job I didn't enjoy, like bedpan duty, but other things were so fulfilling. I had a gentle but firm touch, and I changed dressings and tended wounds with a steady but kind hand. Sometimes what was truly needed was a soft voice and a hand squeeze, compassion. Sometimes it was reading a letter from a loved one or writing one. There were times, though, that I wished I were a doctor and I could do some of the more complex medical procedures that intrigued me. Occasionally, I'd been able to assist the doctors with the more challenging cases, and I'd found it utterly fascinating. But I wouldn't complain. I had a fine job in a brand new hospital, and I was doing my part for the war effort. There was a lot to be said for that. Felt like I'd only been working for a short time when I heard a commotion from a cluster of nurses. Since Allie's departure, I'd stopped engaging in those fun and frivolous conversations with the other girls. At first, I'd been a bit melancholy, missing the fun distraction he provided. And then after I discovered I was pregnant, well, I felt set apart. I certainly couldn't tell them the truth, but the idea of gaily taking off to socials and outings as if I weren't burdened by this secret poked at my conscience. I'd be lying if I said I didn't miss the laughs and the camaraderie desperately. This group of women, we were a community. We were working women, we were nurses. We saw the devastating effects of war firsthand, and that was something no one else could understand. Because of one lapse of judgment, I'd removed myself from that sisterhood. Today, I found I needed it. Maybe it was all the talk about the baby and feeling like everything was about to change, but their excited voices were like the beacon of a lighthouse, showing me the way to safety. I tidied the bowl I'd been using to clean a leg wound and washed my hands, then went over to see what the fuss was about. And it's on fire. Oh, I wish we could go see. Nothing exciting happens up here. What's happened? I asked, leaning into the group. Jessie Smiley gestured with her hands as she replied. We just heard from one of the delivery men. There was an accident in the Narrows, one ship going out, one coming in, and both determined to keep their course, apparently. The waterfront is crowded with people watching. They say the crew has left the boat. If they've left it, who's going to steer it and fight the fire? And here we are, stuck up here. We miss out on all the fun. She affected a pout. I felt a renewed jealousy for my sister's day of shopping with our folks. They were probably down by the docks right now, watching the excitement. Dad would be sure to have a fine story to tell the boys when he returned home. Longing filled me. Our times together these days were so few. I'm sure it'll be fine, I replied, straightening my apron. Listen, girls, my parents are visiting tonight, but do any of you want to do something tomorrow night? Tomorrow was Friday, and there was bound to be something on. I feel like I haven't been out in ages. Not since your alley cat left, said Joan, one of the nurses I'd studied with at the Victoria General Hospital. She gave me a wink. It's about time you stopped moping. I'm sure we can scare up a bit of trouble. Joan didn't really mean trouble. She was a nice girl with a jolly laugh, but a devilish gleam in her eye now and then. I'd like that. I wiggled my eyebrows. You still seeing that corporal, Joan? Joan laughed. That boy is too struck on himself. Hardly a bit of hair, and he spends more time on it than I do. She gave her hair a mock bob with her hand. I have a rule, Nora. I can't go out with a guy who's prettier than me. We all laughed. Another nurse, Irene, squeezed my arm. Girls, what do you say? Nora's ready to stop wallowing over her handsome soldier. Shall we take her out tomorrow night? There's bound to be a social happening somewhere. Where's the best dancing? And by best dancing, I mean the best place to find good partners. We were just discussing possibilities when my chest cramped and I couldn't breathe. There was something like all the air had been sucked out of the room. It was a horrible, heavy sensation that something was terribly wrong. When the air came rushing back, it was unleashed with an unbridled fury and boom that threw me to the floor. Glass shattered and steel pans and instruments went flying while people were thrown off their feet and beds by the impact. Instinctively, I covered my head with my hands as supplies and shelves toppled, landing with a deafening crash. Cries of terror and breaking glass filled the dusty air. But once everything stopped, the deafening silence was worse than the commotion, as if something had irrevocably changed. I gingerly moved my hands off my neck and ran them down my body, making sure I didn't have any cuts from the broken glass. Nurse Crowell, are you all right? The voice sounded far away, as if I had cotton in my ears. I had to get up, didn't I? But I couldn't seem to make my arms and legs work as they should. What had happened? Fear crowded my chest. Had we been bombed? Had the Germans come here all the way across the Atlantic? The room spun as firm hands helped me up and guided me to a chair. There we go, nice and easy. Are you hurt anywhere? I shook my head. No, just, I put my hand on my diaphragm. Breathe. You've had the wind knocked out of you. I recognized Matron Cotton's voice now, firm and comforting in its practicality. Give it time and your breath will come back. Let me check you for cuts. My head swam, but I was finally able to focus my gaze on the matron's face. I held out my hands and the matron did a quick examination. Very good. Take a moment now, Nurse Crowell, but only a moment. We're about to get very busy. Were we bombed? The words caught in my throat, fearful and incredulous. This was Halifax, and yet there was a reason for all the fortifications around the city and harbor. I don't know, Nurse Crowell, but our patients need us now, and more will be at our door within minutes. That I know for sure. The matron kindly pressed a cup of water into my hands. It was only after I'd taken the first sip that I looked up and finally understood what was happening around me. The hospital was in chaos. Soldiers who had been on the battlefield were panicked and needed settling. Beds were overturned, mattresses tumbled and needed to be righted. Broken glass and fallen items littered the floors. One of the nurses I'd just been chatting to, Aileen, stumbled by with a bloody dressing pressed to her head, needing medical attention. Others, doctors and nurses, scrambled around, either barking or following orders, trying to create calm out of the pandemonium. We must prepare, the matron said loudly. Many of the injured will come here and we will be ready, she decreed, as if any other outcome was unthinkable. Matron continued handing out orders, her time served overseas in the clearing hospital, holding her in good stead. Nurses scrambled to fulfill their duties. I finally stood on shaky legs, took a deep breath, and placed a hand on my stomach. I'd been thrown to the floor most violently. Was there a chance the impact had hurt the baby? For a brief moment, I thought maybe it would solve all my problems. And then in the very next second, I shook my head. Wrong or right, I wanted this baby. Even with all the trouble it was bound to cause, I didn't want anything to happen to him or her. The protective feeling was so new and strange, I wasn't sure what to do with it. Nurse Crowell, get moving. I jumped to attention and hurried to help one of the orderlies right a row of beds, shoving the mattresses back onto the metal frames. We worked to get the men settled again, handling them gently but efficiently, knowing time was of the essence. Private Doucette looked at me with wild eyes. I said his name 3 times and gave him a gentle shake before his gaze cleared and he was able to focus on me. Private, please go back to your bed. You're safe. I hoped it wasn't a lie. When I was assured he was fine, I moved on to the next and the next, trying to bring some organization to the ward. When I got to Corporal Jenkins, I put a calming hand on his arm, knowing he was prone to panic and that sometimes a gentle touch helped anchor him. Corporal, I said, trying to be gentle but having to raise my voice over the commotion. Corporal Jenkins, you need to get back into bed. His eyes were panicked, his muscles corded with tension. He'd been pacing, his limp noticeable. My heart ached for the men who carried the effects of the battlefield home with them, but there was little time to waste. Corporal, look at me. It's Nurse Crowell. His dark eyes met mine. Breathe, I ordered. You must breathe. slowly, in and out. He nodded, rapid shakes of his head, but in a few moments his chest rose and fell a little more regularly. Corporal Jenkins, you must get back in bed. I know you're frightened, but there are new patients arriving that desperately need my help. He gripped my fingers so tightly it was painful, and I thought I might have bruises on the tops of my hands later. I waited half a heartbeat, and then he nodded again. I have to do something, he said. The wound on his leg was improving, though I suspected he'd always walk with a limp. Right now, he was waiting to have a piece of shrapnel removed from near his hip, which caused him regular pain. Please, he said, more forceful, let me help. It's better than watching. I understood that. Keeping busy kept one from thinking too much. Wasn't I guilty of losing myself in my work so I didn't have to think about my troubles? I gave a brusque nod and beckoned to an orderly. Corporal Jenkins wishes to be of some use, I said. If there's anything he can do to help, give him orders. If what matron said was true, we could use all the help we could get. I darted away before either man could respond, but when I looked back a few minutes later, I saw Jenkins following the orderly. His limp was pronounced, but he was moving with purpose and determination. Hammond was sitting on his bed, blank gaze forward, body rigid as if paralyzed. My heart ached for him, knowing he'd disappeared to somewhere else in time. There was nothing I could do for him right now, even if I wanted to, for the first of the wounded had started to arrive. I stared at the bodies coming in the door. They were covered with dust and dirt and blood, and their faces, oh, their faces. For the first time in my life, I truly understood what terror looked like through the eyes of another. They were the walking wounded, and they were everywhere. It had to be the boat in the harbor, one of the doctors said, as he passed by my shoulder. Oh God, the docks. We need to prepare for so many casualties. I froze as dread and fear raced down my body in a cold, electrifying line, threatening to weaken me at the knees. The docks would have been crowded with workers and with Haligonians going about their day. Jane was down there. My parents were down there. My God, Clara was down there. Jane had said Clara was too much for Mrs. Thompson today and took her with them. My whole family. Had they been watching the ships? Were they safe? The urge to run and find them was overwhelming. What if they were dead? What if they were hurt and needed my help? I had to. Nurse? Nurse! I jumped at the sharp yell. I couldn't think about them now. There were wounded here. Mothers and fathers, daughters and sons. And they were relying on me. I shook my head and pushed myself into the fray. Within minutes, the hospital was overrun.
That's so good. Hang on, I'm just going to bring me back in there. That's an amazing, amazing draw. The picture you just painted there was so beautiful. Again, I just can't understand why we are not taught this part of Canadian history, because
I agree.
This is what woke me up to Canadian history. It's the whole reason I started to write it, because when I moved there, I'd never heard of it. And now that I'm living in the West and I say to people, well, I wrote a book about the Halifax explosion, they look at me like, what's that?
What?
They have
I
no.
know. Same.
It's nuts. And you've lived there your whole life, right? You've been in Nova Scotia your whole life?
Well, no, I lived in Calgary for 12 years. So I was out. Yeah, I was out west for a while. I grew up in New Brunswick, and it wasn't in our social studies or Canadian history curriculum either. But when I did learn about it was when I took Atlantic literature in grade 12.
Ah,
And I was really lucky that at that time we had some English lit electives. So Canadian lit and Atlantic lit were ones I could take. And I read Barometer Rising, of course, by Hugh McLennan. So that was my introduction to it, but it did not come from a history class.
I don't get it. I don't.
Me
And
either.
I was
Me either.
living out there in 2017 for the 100th anniversary, and my two
Right.
daughters were in high school. And I was all over it. I was all over the city trying to get a hold of everything I could see about the explosion and, feel it again, because it was as horrible as any of these things are, it's still exciting to learn about it and feel it coming back to life in your head. And so I was all over the place. And I was talking one night, I remember, to the family and saying something about the explosion. And both girls in high school looked at me and said, what explosion? On the 100th anniversary. They were not being taught in high school. Now I know that's just,
In Halifax.
yeah, it was on the Eastern Shore, but it was like that's only one school. Probably a lot more were doing it. But I mean, this is Canadian history, people. I
But
don't,
I would say no, they weren't because curriculum is province wide, right? So, I don't get it. Whether it was because it was a home front story, it's not a battlefield story. I don't know, but I mean, it literally changed the landscape of Halifax.
yes, and
Like,
I learned that that was the reason that the CNIB, the Canadian National Institute for the Blind, was born because of all the
yes.
shattering and 25,000 people homeless, something like that. And so the Hydrostone area in Halifax was built. And if anyone doesn't know that, they had to build special housing in case this ever happened again. With thank God, nothing ever came close to that. But
Yeah, and the hydrostone manufacturing took place on the Dartmouth side, and I mean, there's so much like interesting stuff to learn from the research.
yes, it really, yeah, it really woke me up. And so,
So, at the 100th anniversary, were you writing Tides of Honor at that time?
no, mine came out in 2015. So
Okay, so you were a little before that because I've read that twice.
thank you. Well, I read Black Ice or Black Snow. That was by John Tatry out there, and I that
Mhm.
amazed me. And I wrote to him, and actually was able to work one of his characters
Oh,
into
nice.
that was kind of fun. Um, yeah, it's at that point I knew everything that I could know about it, and it's never left me, that story, the whole Halifax explosion. And obviously, it was a big deal for you to write about because you've been writing for years in an entirely different genre. So,
Yeah.
what was it that pulled you over to this side of the street to where I've been working for the last 12 years?
A little bit of the universe had a hand in it. Um, I've always really loved reading historical fiction. And for many, many years, I was too chicken to try it. In fact, I even remember one of my editors, probably late 2010s, so probably 2018, 2019, saying, have you ever thought about writing a historical? And I'm like, yes, but like, no, because I was intimidated by the research. I was afraid of getting things wrong and I was just afraid. And but I loved reading it. It actually is my preferred genre to read. So then in 2020, as the pandemic was gearing up, uh, someone else approached me and asked if I would consider writing historicals or rom-com with Canadian content. And I was like, I like to think I'm amusing, but I wasn't sure if writing rom-com was where I would belong. It's a lot of pressure to be funny. Um, but historical kind of grabbed me, and I just thought, like, if not now, when? And if, am I going to let fear stop me? And I just thought, if I don't do this, I'll look back and always regret not trying.
Yes. And so now that you've done this, that you've accomplished this, how does it feel? Like, was it scary to begin with, or did you just dive in? Because I know it's intimidating. I never knew what I was doing, so I know it's intimidating, but how did it feel to finally get into that?
You know, it's kind of funny because I went through several iterations of it before we finally settled on, the two main characters that I have. And then we also went back and forth on point of view. So even in revisions, Nora had originally been in third person point of view, and we decided to change her up and put her in first. And as soon as I wrote one chapter in first, I knew that. So that was a huge revision, going through and changing everything. But for the most part, I just sort of embraced it and thought, I'm going to do the best I can. I'm going to enjoy the challenge. I really was looking for a challenge and something to stretch me. So I kind of leaned into it. And then, yeah, it just kind of worked out. It was a lot of work, but I loved it. I love doing it a lot.
Yeah, and just so people know, you have 68 books in your backlist, is that right?
This is my 68th, so I have 67 in my backlist.
Okay, I that's just like alien to me. I can't even imagine that. And for that to intimidate you, that's nothing. But it's I'm so glad that you did this. I really enjoyed the perspective. That's the cool thing about historical fiction, right? Everyone says, "Oh, there's so much World War II fiction, there's so much whatever." There's so many stories within it that can be told. You and I wrote about this exact same day in history, and yet our stories are completely different.
Wildly different.
Love that, right? I learned when I read yours, I learned so many other things. And I've mentioned this before to readers that when historical fiction authors get busy with the research, um, we usually go overboard. So I'm betting that in your head, you have about 90% more stuff that you never got to write down. And
Yeah, I do. I usually tell people it's the 90-10 rule.
yeah, as that must be something different for you because working with the other genre, you would have lots and lots of research, but it wouldn't be, you could probably use most of it. Am I off base there?
Yeah, and it doesn't take as much research, right? So most of the time, because I come from romance land, so and contemporary, so most of the time it would be researching areas
Right,
like
right.
settings, researching vocations, jobs, that kind of thing. So, I would know more than would ever make it in, but you want to make it authentic.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of what happens with me, whether it's historical or romance, as far as authenticity, is I look for emotional authenticity. So if the emotions are, and I think that's what people remember more than anything else.
Yeah, I think so too. If you get it, if you can reach their hearts, you can put something in their heads. That's how I think. And people will go
Yeah.
up, look into more history because you've opened that whole portal into something
Oh, I
new.
hope so.
I think so. And yeah, I hope everybody reads this. When I read this, it was called The Long Way Home. Isn't it funny?
Yeah.
Change? Where'd that come from? Where'd it go?
Um, I don't remember why my editor came back and said, we're looking at the title and we want to change it to something a little different. And I forget the reasoning because it was a long time ago. It's taken a while to get this, from actually being, bought to market, to bookshelves. So I don't quite remember why, but I do remember that we went back and forth several times and there'd be like 10 or 15 titles. And then I'd be like, I'm kind of okay with this one or maybe this one. And then they take that back and then they'd send some more. And then I'd send like 10 over. And then, we'd gone a couple of days without talking at all. And then my editor emailed me and she goes, I was rereading and she said, a line jumped out at me. And what do you think of when the world fell silent? Because it is from the book. And I'm like, I love that. And
Yeah,
that was it. And that was it. We finally, hit it. And that was it.
yeah. Is that I'm just uneducated in this, but is it the same process with the other genre, or is it more? Because I know with I go through the same thing as you did, and I'll get a bunch of titles, or once in a while you'll send one and they'll say that's exactly the right one that we want. So that's
Right.
but
Um, No, it's not the same. I mean, so when I was doing books for St. Martin's, it was fairly collaborative on titles, and we went back and forth kind of the same way. But romance titles are also quite tropey. So, they hit, certain words.
right.
And so when I was writing for Harlequin years ago, quite often it would be, here's your title,
Okay.
and now if I really, really hated it, I could be like, I really hate this. Can we do something else? And they would. Like, I've never been really stuck with, and same with a cover.
Yes.
They're like, here's your cover. But if there was something I really did not like about it, they would go back and do something different for me. But this was way more collaborative from title to cover to audio narrators. Like, it was a really good experience.
It's a beautiful cover. I love it. It's
I
just
do too.
you have it there? Is it? Yeah, you have it there.
Yes, of course
Yeah,
I do.
show that off. Look how pretty that is. I love that.
Yeah.
I can
Yeah,
see
yeah. I
show.
like the cover a lot.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So, does that mean that you're going to be sticking with historical fiction, or are you going to revert back and forth, or What do you think?
Okay, so I never say never because, I'd always said I wouldn't write historical fiction either, and here I am. So I never say never. But for right now, I'm loving writing hist fic. It's where I want to be, and this is where I see myself for a while.
Well, you're in the right room, right? Everybody out there. So what are you working on now? I assume you are.
I'm work. I am. I have a book due later this fall. Same publisher, historical fiction, and it is tentatively called The Coldest Night, and it's set partially aboard Titanic,
Oh,
partially aboard the Carpathia, and then the last third will begin in New York and then finish in Halifax because Halifax also has a huge Titanic connection.
yes, it does. And then
Yeah.
I've been to Five Fishermen and some of those restaurants where, they have ghosts from there. So I
They
believe,
do, and when I got my contract for When the World Fell Silent, my best friend Barb was here visiting, and my friend Jenna from Oregon, and we actually went to the Five Fishermen for a toast. And so, but yes, it's rumored to be haunted because, of course, it was used as a mortuary in those days.
yeah, so much history in Halifax, I think. And I think what got me when I first moved out there was how, like the whole province, because I remember I came from Toronto and then Calgary and then I was in New York and then eventually I was out there and I thought the coolest thing was if I went driving along a road. I lived on the Eastern Shore, so it was all pretty quiet out there.
Mhm.
Driving along, you could see houses together that were generations of families and cemeteries that were generations of families and so much history there. And oh, there's so much more you can write out there.
There's a ton. Like my daughter was asking just the other day, like, what are you going to write next? And I'm like, well, I have an idea, but honestly, it's trying to narrow it down because there's so much that's intriguing. And I love 20th century. Like I keep thinking, oh, I'm going to stay in 20th century. But then there was a shipwreck off of Terrence Bay in the late 19th century. And I'm thinking, oh, but a shipwreck, you know what I mean? Like there's so much that you can tackle. And of course, you went back quite a ways
Yeah.
with the Acadian expulsion and
I
with
think
yours. Like,
that's too far from my comfort zone, but the shipwrecks, there's thousands of them there, like so many stories. Oh, I'm excited for you. I'm
I know, I know. So, also internment camps.
oh yeah.
There was one in Amherst, there's one in Minto, New Brunswick, which, isn't far from where I grew up. And so there's all kinds of things. And I learn more every day about things that you would never imagine would have
Yes.
happened.
Well, when I did The Secret Keeper and learning about the listening stations in Nova Scotia, across the whole country, but they were
Right.
in all of the different New Brunswick having Coverdale and all the different camps and so much amazing stuff. And people read our books and they go, "This is Canadian? I had no idea our country did."
Right.
Still don't understand.
Actually, the listening stations is one of the things that has me really intrigued.
Fascinating. I love that. There was a story of one of the women, she had one of the Loran machines, a long range. There's a YouTube video of her speaking, and she said that they had all this stuff, and they were, if the enemy ever came close, they would have to destroy it. And so they had all guns and they had all these different weapons to defend it. But she said, honestly, we couldn't lift any of these guns. We were too small. So the idea was just to blow it up and run. So
Yeah.
fortunately, that didn't happen, but yeah, so many great points in history here. And now I want to know, today is a big drop day, big release day. What are your plans?
Hmm.
Got going.
Well, I'm this. But tonight I am going to be at the Halifax Public Library at the Central Library on Spring Garden. So if you're in the Halifax area, I'm going to be there with B.R. Myers. We're in conversation. She's going to be asking me all kinds of fun things.
Terrific.
So I'll be there this evening. She also has a book dropping August 20th, I think, which is The Third Wife of Faraday House. And I've read A Dreadful Splendor, so I'm really it's amazing. So I'm very excited. So we're in conversation together tonight. And then on the 20th, at the Writers Federation of Nova Scotia offices down on Marginal Road, so close to Pier 21, I'm having a book launch, my first ever. After this many books, this is actually my first ever book launch. So,
Isn't
and that's open. It's open to the public. So,
isn't that funny? I did that for the first time this time too. I thought, well, I've never had one. Why do I need one? And then I thought, that's fun. And you're gonna have fun. It is fun. Because it's nerve-wracking. Is anybody gonna
very.
but yeah, I had a blast. You're gonna have fun. I wish I could be there for you. But
Me too.
we'll have fun. I'll get back there sometime and you and I can go out and have a glass of wine and talk about a whole bunch of stuff.
We will. And maybe like we'll do a Facebook Live or something and just make people jealous that they're not there with us.
Exactly. We could do that. Well, congratulations on everything. Thank you for sparing the time to chat with me on this big day, on this monumental day, and I'm very excited for you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I'm very happy you're back.
I I'm happy. I hope nobody takes this page over again. If that happens, if anybody's on here worrying about those things, all of these videos, I think there's over 60 of them now, back to 2020. They're all over on YouTube as well, if you look under my channel. But I love having them here on Facebook, and I'm so happy that I did not, after all, have to delete the page, because then I could have you back and I could have my other friends. And I have lots of friends on here who are readers, and I would miss everybody too much. So I'm glad to be here, and I'm very honored that you squeezed me in on your busy day. And I wish you all the luck in the world.
Thank you. Thank you.
And enjoy when the world fell silent. Bye for now.
Thanks, Jen.